Sign the compliance manifest, Victor, or I will find someone who will, and you will be out on the street by 5 o'clock. Gerald Thorne sneered, his face inches from mine, his expensive cologne doing nothing to mask the sweat of desperation. I looked at the digital readout on the shipping log, then at the young, arrogant chief operating officer who had inherited his position through family ties. I did not blink, nor did I raise my voice. The temperature loggers registered 68 degrees Fahrenheit for 6 consecutive hours in Bay 4, Gerald. That is a direct violation of 21 CFR Section 211.142. If I sign this manifest, I commit federal perjury, and the vaccine batch is legally compromised. Gerald slammed his fist onto the conference table, his gold watch rattling against the polished mahogany. I do not care about your federal regulations. We have a $12 million contract with Genentech, and those trucks are leaving this facility tonight. You are done here, Victor. Pack your desk. To understand how we arrived at this boardroom showdown, you have to understand the cold, systematic world of pharmaceutical logistics. My name is Victor Finch. I am 51 years old, and for the last 14 years, I have served as the Senior Director of Internal Audit and Regulatory Compliance for Helix Pharma Logistics. Before I arrived in 2012, Helix was a chaotic mid-sized shipping company trying to break into the highly regulated world of cold-chain biotransport. They were failing. They were racking up fines from the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, and their shipping manifests looked like they had been written on napkins. I changed all of that. Over more than a decade, I built our compliance framework from the ground up. I spent years earning my credentials, becoming the Registered Hazardous Materials Transportation Compliance Officer, or HMTCO, and the Designated Qualified Individual, the QI, on Helix's master operating permits with both the FDA and the Department of Transportation. These are not just corporate titles, they are federally mandated legal designations. Under federal law, a company cannot transport biological agents, clinical trial materials, or hazardous medical waste without a certified, named qualified individual registered in the federal database. My name, my certifications, and my personal liability insurance were the legal anchor for Helix's entire shipping network. But my control over the operation went even deeper. In 2016, frustrated by the slow, error-prone commercial auditing software available on the market, I spent my nights and weekends writing a custom program. I called it Finch Audit. It was a proprietary compliance tracking software designed specifically for pharmaceutical warehouses. Finch Audit integrated directly with the physical temperature sensors and cold storage bases, cross-referenced the real-time readings with FDA regulations, and automatically generated the secure QR-coded compliance certificates required by U.S. Customs and state DOT checkpoints. Recognizing the value of the software, the previous CEO, a reasonable man named Franklin Crofton, knew Helix could not afford to buy Finch Audit outright. So, we signed an independent intellectual property lease agreement. Under the terms of the IP lease, I licensed Finch Audit to Helix for a nominal fee of $1 per year, with a strict clause. The license was active only as long as I was employed by the company. If my employment was terminated for any reason other than documented, third-party proven gross misconduct, the software license would immediately revoke, and Helix would lose the right to use the API that generated the compliance QR codes. I hosted the core database on my private server, letting Helix access it through a secure cloud bridge. For years, this setup worked flawlessly. Helix grew from a regional player into a corporate powerhouse, landing a massive $12 million annual recurring revenue contract with Genentech Pharmaceuticals to distribute their new temperature-sensitive clinical vaccines. My routine was absolute. Every morning at 7, I would arrive at the Helix facility, pour a cup of black coffee, and run the diagnostic logs on Finch Audit. I would walk the bays, inspecting the physical seals on the refrigerated containers, ensuring the liquid nitrogen backup systems were pressurized, and verifying that every driver's hazardous materials license was active. Then, 6 months ago, Franklin Crofton retired. The board of directors, looking to cut operational costs and maximize short-term profits, appointed Gerald Thorne as the new chief operating officer. Gerald was 35, the nephew of the board's chairman, and possessed a degree from a business school that taught him how to read spreadsheets, but not how to read federal regulations. He arrived with a mission to increase shipping volume by 30% while cutting the compliance budget in half. He saw my department not as a shield against federal prosecution, but as an expensive speed bump. From day one, Gerald and I clashed. He wanted to reduce the mandatory 4-hour pre-shipment refrigeration audit for biological goods to a mere 15 minutes. "Time is money, Victor," he would tell me, strutting through the warehouse in his handmade Italian shoes, completely out of place among the forklifts and steel-toed boots. "If the product looks cold, it is cold. We are delaying shipments for paperwork." I would calmly point to the federal code printed on the wall. "We are delaying shipments to ensure we do not distribute dead vaccines that could ruin clinical trials and cost us our shipping license, Gerald." He hated me for it. He hated that the warehouse staff respected my compliance decisions more than his operational directives. He hated that if I flagged a container, the logistics manager, a gruff veteran named Roger, would refuse to load it onto the trucks. But most of all, Gerald hated that his $450,000 quarterly operational bonus was tied to meeting shipping quotas that my strict compliance standards made difficult to rush. The breaking point arrived on a humid Tuesday in mid-August. Genentech had prepared a $4 million shipment of experimental oncology vaccines, designated for 3 major research hospitals on the East Coast. The shipment required constant refrigeration at exactly 36 degrees Fahrenheit. But when the shipment arrived at our loading dock, the cooling unit in Bay 4 failed. The temperature spiked to 68 degrees for 6 hours. When I arrived at the warehouse, I saw the error codes flashing red on my Finch audit dashboard. The digital sensors had logged the entire temperature excursion. I immediately locked down the shipment, placing a physical red tag on the bay doors and freezing the electronic manifest. 10 minutes later, Gerald Thorne came storming out of his office, his face flushed with anger, holding a printout of the shipment delay notification. That was the moment he dragged me into the boardroom, demanding that I sign the compliance manifest and clear the shipment for departure. "I will not sign it, Gerald," I said, my voice steady as I looked at him. "The vaccines are compromised. If they are administered to patients, they will be ineffective, and the FDA will shut this facility down." Gerald's hand hit the table again. "You are a dinosaur, Victor. You are hiding behind rules because you want to control this company. I am the chief operating officer, and I say this shipment goes out tonight. You are fired for insubordination, effective immediately. Hand over your badge, clear out your office, and get the hell out of my building." I looked at him for a long moment. I did not argue. I did not explain the legal ramifications of what he had just done. I simply took off my security badge, placed it on the mahogany table, and said, "Understood, Gerald. I will pack my personal belongings and leave." I walked out of the boardroom, a calm, cold certainty settling over me. Gerald Thorne wanted to run a logistics empire without rules. He was about to find out what happens when the foundation is pulled out from under the house. Packing 14 years of your life into a single cardboard box takes less time than you would think. I returned to my office, the quiet sanctuary where I had spent countless nights poring over federal shipping guidelines and safety logs. The glass walls of my office looked out over the main warehouse floor, where the hum of forklifts and the shouting of crew leaders suddenly felt distant. My hands were steady as I placed my framed compliance certificates, my reference manuals, and a few personal photos into the box. Roger, the warehouse logistics manager, was standing by my door before I had even finished. His face was pale, his brow furrowed with concern. Roger was a practical man who had spent 30 years in logistics, and he knew exactly how much the company relied on my oversight. "Victor, tell me it is not true," he whispered, casting a nervous glance back toward the executive offices. "The word is spreading that Thorne just let you go. Who is going to sign off on the Genentech run? Those trucks are scheduled to load in 3 hours." "It is true, Roger," I replied, placing a heavy compliance handbook on top of my files. "Gerald decided that my insistence on temperature safety was an obstacle to the company's growth. He has terminated my contract for insubordination." "This is madness," Roger hissed, stepping inside my office and lowering his voice even further. That vaccine batch sat in Bay 4 while the cooling compressor was completely dead. It was 92 degrees outside today, Victor. The bay was like an oven. If we load those boxes, we are shipping useless liquid. What happens if the hospitals test the temperature logs? What happens when they see the vaccines are dead? That is no longer our concern, Roger, I said calmly. I warned Gerald of the regulations. I cited CFR 211.142. He chose to ignore it. As of 10 minutes ago, my legal responsibility to Helix Pharma Logistics has ended. My advice to you is to follow your operating manuals exactly as they are written. Do not sign anything you did not personally verify. Roger looked at me, a mix of fear and respect in his eyes. He shook my hand, his grip tight. You built this place's reputation, Victor. Without you, we are just a bunch of guys moving boxes in the dark. Good luck. I carried my box out of the building. As I crossed the parking lot, I looked up at the third-floor executive suite. Gerald Thorne was standing by the floor-to-ceiling glass window. He was holding a cup of coffee, a smug smile plastered across his face. He gave me a mocking salute with his cup. I did not react. I simply placed my box in the trunk of my sedan, got behind the wheel, and drove away. Back in the warehouse, Gerald did not waste a single second. He called a meeting in the main boardroom, summoning Brandon Price, a 26-year-old junior compliance analyst who had been hired only 6 months prior. Brandon was eager to please, carrying a mountain of student debt and a desperate need to secure his position. He was the perfect target for Gerald's manipulation. "Brandon, sit down," Gerald said, his voice dripping with false warmth as Brandon entered the room. "I have some big news. Victor Finch has decided to retire from his position, effective immediately. He felt the pace of modern logistics was too fast for him. I need someone young, energetic, and forward-thinking to step up. I am appointing you as the acting compliance director starting right now." Brandon's eyes widened. "Director? But Gerald, I don't have the HMTCO certification yet. I haven't completed the hazardous materials transport training, and my name isn't on the FDA master registry." Gerald waved his hand dismissively. "That is just red tape, Brandon. We can update the paperwork with the federal registry next month. Right now, what matters is keeping the business moving. We have a $4 million shipment of Genentech vaccine sitting in Bay 4. The client needs those trucks on the road tonight. I need you to sign the compliance manifest and clear the shipment." "But—" "Victor put a red tag on Bay 4, Brandon stammered, his voice shaking. "He said the temperature logs showed a major deviation. If the vaccine sat at 68 degrees, they might be ruined." Gerald leaned forward, his warm demeanor vanishing, replaced by a cold, intimidating glare. Victor was an alarmist who wanted to justify his own salary. "The physical indicators on the outer crates are green, Brandon. The cargo is perfectly fine. Now, you can either be a team player who steps up to a director role with a 20% raise, or you can follow Victor out the door. The choice is yours, but I need an answer in the next 2 minutes." Brandon swallowed hard, looking at the compliance manifest on the screen. He was terrified of losing his job, and the promise of a promotion was too tempting to resist. I will sign it, Gerald. But how do we get the Finch audit system to generate the QR codes? Victor's account is locked. Just bypass the automated system, Gerald ordered. Use the manual override protocol. We have a backup manifest template. Print the forms, sign them manually, and hand them to the drivers. U.S. Customs and the state DO checkpoints rarely scan the QR codes anyway. They just want to see a signature on the paper manifest. Get it done. By 7 o'clock that evening, the manual manifests were signed by Brandon Price, acting under Gerald's direct instructions. 3 heavy refrigerated semi-trucks, carrying $4 million of compromised vaccines, rolled out of the Helix facility heading toward the interstate. Gerald Thorne went back to his office, poured himself a glass of expensive scotch, and congratulated himself on saving the Genentech contract and securing his quarterly bonus. He believed he had successfully pushed the old guard out of the way. He had no idea that I was already sitting at my home desk, opening the administrative console of the Finch audit server. Sitting in my home office, the evening sun casting long shadows across my wooden desk, I opened my personal laptop. I did not feel anger. I felt the calm satisfaction of a programmer who was about to execute a clean, pre-written script. Gerald Thorne believed that compliance was just a set of arbitrary rules that could be swept aside by executive decree. He was about to learn that federal regulations and code do not care about corporate titles. First, I logged into the Master Administrative Console for Finch Audit, which was hosted on my private secure AWS server. I navigated to the API Keys Management page. Under the intellectual property lease agreement signed by the former CEO Franklin Crofton and myself in 2016, Helix's access to the Finch audit database was contingent upon my active employment. Since Gerald had terminated me without the contractually required third-party audit proving gross misconduct, the license was automatically revoked. With 3 keystrokes, I'd disabled the active API tokens associated with the Helix warehouse server. Immediately, the connection between their local terminals and the central Finch audit database was severed. If anyone tried to access the system, scan one of the existing compliance QR codes, or generate a new manifest, the server would return a stark black and white page with a 403 forbidden error, license revoked. Unauthorized access, prohibited under Title 17, United States Code, Section 501. Helix's entire shipping and auditing database was now a closed vault. Next, I opened the official portal for the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, and the FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research database. Under federal law, specifically Title 49 of the Code of Federal Regulations, a company transporting hazardous materials or clinical trial drugs must maintain a certified qualified individual, a QI, on their active registration. I pulled up Form 49QA, the official notice of withdrawal as the designated qualified individual. I filled out the form, entering my certification number, HMTCO 9912, and specifying the exact time of my termination, August 15, 2026, at 5:00 p.m. I signed the form digitally and hit submit. The federal database processed the request instantly. In the eyes of the U.S. government, Helix Pharma Logistics no longer had a certified compliance officer on record. Under PHMSA safety protocols, this triggered an automatic, immediate administrative hold on their master hazardous materials transport license. Any shipment dispatched after 5:00 p.m. without a registered qualified individual was now technically an illegal transit of hazardous substances. After completing the federal filings, I drafted a formal legal notification to Helix's corporate legal department. I attached the original 2016 intellectual property lease agreement, highlighting Clause 12C. This clause stated that in the event of termination of the creator's employment without proven cause, all rights to use the Finch audit software, database structure, and compliance generation algorithms reverted solely to me, and that any continued use would constitute willful intellectual property infringement. I wrote, "Please be advised that Helix Pharma Logistics must immediately cease and desist all use of the Finch audit system. Any unauthorized attempt to bypass the API lockout or use the software's proprietary templates will be met with legal action seeking statutory damages of $150,000 per day of violation under 17 U.S.C. Section 504. I sent the email with delivery tracking and scheduled a physical copy to be delivered via courier first thing in the morning. Finally, I drafted an email to Clara Hensley, the chief quality auditor at Genentech Pharmaceuticals. Clara and I had worked together for nearly a decade, and she knew that my strict auditing standards were the only reason Genentech had trusted Helix with their $12 million distribution contract. "Dear Clara," I wrote, "I am writing to inform you that, as of 5:00 p.m. today, I am no longer with Helix Pharma Logistics. Consequently, I was unable to certify the shipment of oncology vaccines, lot number GT9921, scheduled for dispatch tonight. During my final inspection this afternoon, the digital temperature sensors in Bay 4 registered a 6-hour temperature excursion of 68 degrees Fahrenheit, violating the cold chain threshold required by 21 CFR, Section 211.142. I refused to sign the manifest due to the compromised efficacy of the batch. However, the chief operating officer, Gerald Thorne, bypassed the compliance lockout and ordered the shipment to be dispatched under manual, unverified manifests signed by an uncertified employee. For the safety of the clinical trials and the patients, I felt it was my duty to report this deviation directly to your quality team. Sincerely, Victor Finch. I hit send. It was 8:30 p.m. The 3 refrigerated semi-trucks carrying the compromised oncology vaccines were currently driving down the interstate, their drivers completely unaware that they were transporting $4 million of legally unsellable cargo under a suspended federal license, using forged or manual compliance documents that would fail the first scan. I closed my laptop, walked out to my back porch, and poured myself a glass of iced tea. For 14 years, I had carried the stress of Helix's compliance burden on my shoulders, constantly worrying about the safety of the shipments and the integrity of the logistics network. For the first time in a decade and a half, that burden was gone. I sat in the warm evening breeze, listening to the crickets, and waited for the phone calls that I knew would begin by tomorrow morning. Gerald Thorne thought he could cut corners to save a few dollars. He was about to learn that in the world of compliance, the cost of breaking the rules is always far greater than the cost of following them. The collapse of Gerald Thorne's operational empire began at exactly 7:45 the following morning. The first refrigerated semi-truck, carrying $1.3 million of the Genentech oncology vaccines, pulled into the Virginia Department of Transportation inspection station on Interstate 95. The DOT inspector, a seasoned officer who had seen every trick in the logistics book, requested the hazardous materials manifest. When the driver handed him the manual, paper form signed by Brandon Price, the inspector plugged Helix's DOT registration number into the federal database. The screen flashed a red warning: carrier hazmat registration suspended. No registered qualified individual. The inspector then tried to scan the compliance QR code that was supposed to verify the refrigeration logs. Because I had revoked the API tokens, the scanner redirected the inspector's tablet to my private server's error page. License revoked. Unauthorized access prohibited. The inspector did not hesitate. He ordered the driver to pull the rig into the inspection lot, placed an immediate out-of-service order on the vehicle, and confiscated the shipping manifest. Within 30 minutes, the other 2 trucks heading toward hospitals in Maryland and New York were grounded at state checkpoints for the exact same violations. The logistics network of Helix Pharma Logistics had officially ground to a halt. Back at the Helix headquarters, the atmosphere was chaotic. Gerald Thorne sat at his desk, staring at a high-priority email from Clara Hensley at Genentech. The tone of the email was icy and uncompromising. Genentech had received reports of a serious temperature deviation in Bay 4 and demanded that Helix upload the verified digital temperature logs from Finch Audit for Lot GT 9921 within 2 hours. The email concluded with a stark warning. If the logs were not provided, or if the logs showed a temperature deviation exceeding 36 degrees Fahrenheit, Genentech would declare Helix in default of their $12 million contract, sue for the full $4 million value of the ruined vaccines, and seek punitive damages. Gerald tried to log into the Finch Audit terminal to delete the temperature logs and generate a falsified report. But when he clicked the desktop icon, the screen returned the black and white forbidden error message. He tried to bypass the security wall, screaming at the IT staff, but they could do nothing. The software database did not exist on their servers. It was hosted on my private AWS cloud, and the door was locked from the inside. Just as Gerald was throwing a paperweight across his office, Catherine Brooks, Helix's general counsel, walked in. She was not smiling. She held a printed copy of the cease and desist letter I had sent the previous evening. "Gerald, we have a catastrophic situation," Catherine said, closing the door behind her. "I just received this notice from Victor Finch's attorney. He has officially revoked the license for the Finch Audit software. If we use any part of that system, or even try to bypass his server lock to print manifests, we are committing willful copyright infringement. The statutory damages are up to $150,000 per day, and Victor's legal team has already prepared a federal injunction." "I don't care about his software," Gerald shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "Tell it to write a new program. Get our developers to build a database. We have trucks sitting at the border and Genentech is threatening to sue us for $4 million. Write a new database?" Catherine looked at him as if he had lost his mind. Finch Audit took Victor 5 years to develop and refine. It is integrated with our physical sensors and federal databases. It would take a team of developers 6 months and hundreds of thousands of dollars to build a replacement. In the meantime, we cannot ship a single box of biological materials. We are legally dead in the water. Furthermore, I checked the PHMSA database. Victor withdrew as our qualified individual yesterday at 5 o'clock. Our hazardous materials transportation permit is suspended. That is why our trucks are currently being detained by the DOT. Gerald's face turned pale. The reality of the situation was finally breaking through his arrogance. Can we just hire someone else to be the qualified individual? Call a compliance consulting firm. To get a new QI registered and approved by the FDA and PHMSA takes at least 30 days of background checks, certification verifications, and administrative processing. Catherine explained cold-heartedly. We don't have 30 days, Gerald. We have 90 minutes to send Genitech those temperature logs before they terminate our contract and sue us into bankruptcy. Gerald grabbed his desk phone and dialed my number. I was sitting on my porch enjoying a second cup of coffee when my phone began to vibrate. I looked at the caller ID, Gerald Thorne. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, it rang again. I ignored it. Over the next hour, Gerald called me 18 times and sent 6 increasingly frantic emails offering to double my salary if I would just log back in and help resolve a technical glitch. I did not reply. Finally, I sent a short text message. Please direct all communications to my legal representative, or submit your proposal in writing. I will not discuss this matter over the phone. At 10:30, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed the name of Richard Thorne, the chairman of the board and Gerald's uncle. Richard was a hard-nosed businessman who had built his fortune in real estate, and he did not tolerate incompetence. I answered on the third ring. Victor, this is Richard Thorne, the older man said, his voice gravelly but composed. I am sitting in a room with Catherine Brooks and the board of directors. We have a crisis, and I understand you are the only one who can resolve it. What will it take to get the trucks moving and the software reactivated? Hello, Richard, I said, keeping my voice smooth and professional. I am no longer an employee of Helix, so I cannot perform compliance duties. However, if the board is interested in retaining my services as an independent consultant, I would be open to discussing terms. But I assure you, my consulting rates are quite different from my old salary. Name your terms, Victor, Richard said, his sigh heavy over the line. We don't have time to negotiate. Just tell me what you want. I will send the terms in writing to Catherine within 10 minutes, I replied. Once the agreement is signed by you and the board, and the initial retainer is wired to my account, I will reactivate the software and address the compliance holds. I hung up the phone, opened a draft document on my computer, and began typing the contract that would rewrite my financial future. The agreement I sent to Catherine Brooks was not a standard corporate contract. It was a surrender document. I had drafted it with the precise, cold logic of an auditor who knew his opponent had zero leverage. The terms were clear and non-negotiable. First, Helix Pharma Logistics had to execute an independent compliance consulting contract with me. The rate was set at $500 per hour, with a guaranteed minimum of 40 hours per month, contractually locked for 12 months. This represented a guaranteed minimum consulting income of $240,000. To activate the contract, a non-refundable signing bonus and retainer of $100,000 had to be wired to my personal bank account immediately. Second, the intellectual property lease for Finch Audit was replaced with a commercial enterprise license. The annual licensing fee was set at $150,000, payable in advance on August 15th of each year. The contract included a strict clause. Any attempt by Helix to duplicate, reverse engineer, or bypass the software's secure API would trigger an automatic $500,000 penalty. Third, for the safety of the public and the integrity of the logistics network, the compromised vaccine shipment, lot GT-921, had to be recalled immediately, returned to the facility, and destroyed under standard biohazard disposal protocols at Helix's expense. Brandon Price's compliance signature on the manual manifest was to be legally retracted and updated to indicate that the manifest had been signed under direct operational duress from the chief operating officer. This saved Brandon from potential federal prosecution, though he would be demoted back to a junior compliance analyst under my direct supervision. Finally, the most important clause. Gerald Thorne had to be terminated for cause immediately. The board had to issue a formal corporate resolution citing gross operational negligence and violation of safety protocols as the reasons for his departure. I would not work with, nor license my software to, any entity that employed him. 20 minutes after I sent the document, my bank's mobile application sent a notification to my phone. A wire transfer of $250,000, representing the $100,000 consulting retainer and the $150,000 annual software licensing fee, had cleared. 10 minutes after that, I received an email from Catherine Brooks containing the signed contract bearing the signature of Richard Thorne, chairman of the board. Attached to the email was a copy of the board's resolution terminating Gerald Thorne, effective immediately. I sat back in my chair, took a sip of my iced tea, and opened my laptop. I logged into the Finch Audit Administrative Console and reactivated the API tokens for the Helix warehouse. The connection was restored instantly. I then logged into the PHMSA and FDA databases and registered myself as the temporary external qualified individual for Helix, lifting the administrative hold on their transportation permit. The system was back online. At the warehouse, the impact was immediate. The DOT inspection stations received the updated Federal Registry data, and the 3 grounded semi-trucks were ordered to return to the Helix facility to unload the compromised vaccines for disposal. A new, verified shipment of fresh oncology vaccines was prepared and scheduled for dispatch the following morning, audited and certified under the reactivated Finch audit system. At noon, I drove back to the Helix facility to oversee the destruction of the compromised vaccines. As I walked onto the warehouse floor, the staff stood in silent respect. Roger gave me a subtle nod from the loading dock. His shoulders relaxed for the first time in 24 hours. I walked up to the 3rd floor executive offices. As I reached the glass doors, I saw Gerald Thorne being escorted out by 2 corporate security officers. He was holding a small cardboard box containing his desk items, his designer desk clock, his expensive pens, and his framed business school degree. His face was a mask of defeat, his expensive suit wrinkled, his hair disheveled. He stopped when he saw me standing in the hallway. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. "You planned this," he whispered, his voice shaking with anger. "You set this trap from the beginning." "I did not set any trap." "Gerald," I replied, my voice calm and even. "I simply followed the regulations that protect this company and the patients who receive our shipments. You chose to ignore those regulations because you thought your bonus was more important than safety. You fired the only person who kept your operations legal, and you forgot that you did not own the software that runs your database. You did this to yourself." Gerald opened his mouth to speak, but the security officers took his arms and led him toward the elevator. His career in pharmaceutical logistics was over. The board's formal resolution citing gross negligence would ensure that he would never hold an executive position in a regulated industry again. His $450,000 quarterly bonus was gone, replaced by the prospect of a civil lawsuit from Helix's shareholders to recover the costs of the destroyed shipment and the delay penalties. I walked into the boardroom where Richard Thorne and Catherine Brooks were waiting. Richard stood up and extended his hand. "Thank you for coming back so quickly, Victor. We made a mistake letting Gerald run things his way." "We all make mistakes, Richard," I said, shaking his hand. "But in this industry, a mistake can cost lives and millions of dollars in federal fines. I will ensure that Helix remains in complete compliance with all FDA and DOT regulations. But from now on, we do it by the book, no shortcuts. Today, I run my consulting practice from the comfort of my home office. I spend about 10 hours a week reviewing compliance manifests and monitoring the Finch audit dashboard. The software runs smoothly, generating the required QR codes for every shipment, and my AWS server logs show a steady stream of secure connections from the Helix warehouse. Every month, A check for $20,000 is deposited into my account for my advisory services in addition to the annual software licensing fee. I no longer have to deal with warehouse politics or arrogant executives who think they are above the law. I sit on my back porch watching the sunset and know that sometimes the best way to win a corporate war is not to fight, but to simply let the system enforce its own rules.